World leaders from the NATO alliance have officially declared Russia a direct threat to its security, unveiling a new strategic concept. The military pact has formalized its invitation to Sweden and Finland to join its bloc after Turkey lifted its opposition. It also announced the U.S. will bolster its military forces across Europe. NATO's chief says the world has entered a, quote, era of strategic competition, adding the alliance will be closely following a growing partnership between Moscow and China.
China's growing assertiveness and its coercive policies have consequences for the security of allies and our partners. China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors and threatening Taiwan. China is not our adversary, but we must be clear-eyed about the serious challenges it represents.
Well, let's go over to our correspondent in Madrid right now, Effie Kotsakoska. Effie, there's been a flurry so far of activity at the NATO summit, and we're seeing NATO stepping up a gear, right?
Yes, exactly. This is certainly the case here in Madrid. But in general, we've seen that since the beginning of the war on the 24th of February, the war of Russia to Ukraine. And actually what Macron was saying 3 years ago in 2018, that he was speaking about the brain death of NATO, is not the truth, of course. And what has changed? A lot have changed. And Russia did whatever they could in order to boost and upgrade the role of NATO in the world. What we've seen so far is that, and we've seen it also through the strategic concept of NATO for the next decade, is that the competition of great powers is back, something that we didn't see in the previous one, something like 12 years ago that was signed in Lisbon. Now this is back, and NATO is really trying to strengthen its role, and there is a consensus and an agreement, a unanimity on that from all the 30+2 allies. We've even seen the expansion of NATO to Finland and Sweden, the two long neutral Nordic countries that now want to enter, to seek the NATO protection. So we've seen that the role of NATO is not the same, is even upgraded, and we are going to see it even upgraded in the future.
And it looks like Finland and Sweden are now a shoe-in to get into NATO now that Turkey's not standing in the way. Well, what about that meeting today between U.S. President Biden and Turkish President Erdogan? What was the upshot of that? What did they talk about?
Actually, Chris, this meeting lasted for about 1 hour and 10 minutes. We've seen at the beginning that the mood of this meeting was quite good. We've seen the American President Joe Biden saying to Erdogan, thank you for your incredible work with Finland and Sweden, and also he thanked him about his efforts to really unblock the grains from Ukraine towards the markets of the world. Of course, what was also at the center of the talks, despite the fact there is no readout or official statements, is the F-16 fighter jet that Turkey wants in order to modernize its military equipment. And we've seen in the morning that there were some positive signals from the United States, from Biden's administration, that they are positive of giving these F-16 fighter jets to Turkey, which is available, as they said, member of NATO. It's also important for the alliance as a whole. But of course, there is a process that passes through the Congress. And there we see if finally this big ambition and wish of Turkey will become reality.
Effie, thank you very much for watching that story on the ground in Madrid. Thank you. We'd like to speak to Bradley Bowman, Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome, Mr. Bowman. How important are these in strategic terms, are all these new announcements that we're hearing, especially from the new U.S., especially the new headquarters in Poland, a permanent force over there that Mr. Biden is talking about, more troops for Eastern Europe? How important is that from a strategic level?
Thank you for the opportunity to join you, and thanks for the question. You know, I think these summits, these declarations are very important. Because it serves as a forcing function for negotiations to occur, agreements to be concluded, and to be announced. Because a lot of this is about deterrence, Moscow and Beijing are watching, and they're seeing what these heads of state, these 30 heads of state say, and more importantly, what they do. And so a lot of really positive announcements. The devil will be in the details on these, like when we talk about strengthened military posture in Eastern Europe, what type of military units, what readiness levels, what deployment timelines, what countries will be providing those forces, lots and lots of questions. And we know that a lot of European capitals have struggled just to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Even in the new report released this week, 20 European capitals are still not spending 2% on GDP. So you're going to have a hard time spending more if you can't even meet the current standard.
Oh, yeah, putting the money where the mouth is.
Yes.
What about the fact that you used to fly Black Hawks and other helicopters? You were an advisor in the U.S. Senate. You know what you're talking about. What about Ukraine's president telling NATO during their meeting, during their summit, saying that he'd like to see security guarantees? What do you think about that?
Well, the essence of NATO is in the North Atlantic Treaty codified in Washington in 1949 is Article 5, an attack against one is attack against all. And that's the primary reason countries like Ukraine and Georgia would like to be in NATO, because it gives them those security guarantees. So if I were him, I would be asking exactly for that. But I think we're not going to see Ukraine as a member of NATO anytime soon.
Okay, and then finally, briefly, the NATO now saying that they want this force structure of 300,000 troops across the NATO countries being ready in a state of readiness. But what about the fact that, as you said, that this 2% of GDP, we've only got about a third of those 30 countries that have committed so far. They've promised this for years. Well, what's the likelihood that they will come up with that money?
I think NATO is a leading grand strategic asset for the United States and a leading reason why we have relative transatlantic stability. But, as you said, we got to put our money where our mouth is. A lot of laudable statements coming out this week from this summit. But, we only have, as I said, 20 countries are still not even spending 20% of their GDP on defense. And so if they're going to resource and fund all these new commitments, we're going to have to see that change and change fast.